Been about a year since the handover in Afghanistan. Talk to me a little bit about what you see happening in the country over that period.
I think over the last year, probably the headline is the Taliban have discovered it's more difficult to govern Afghanistan than it necessarily is to conquer Afghanistan. But as we're sitting here 1 year later, I think it's important to also zoom out past Afghanistan and see how the withdrawal has also been in conversation with other global events, and I would say probably most specifically the war in Ukraine. I don't think it's any coincidence that within 6 months of a really disastrous NATO-led withdrawal from Afghanistan that we see a Russian invasion of Ukraine. Those two events are definitely tied. Certainly Vladimir Putin was watching as we were leaving, the last planes were leaving the airport in Kabul. And I think what's been interesting, as much as that was probably one of the darkest chapters in NATO's history, one of the brightest has been its response to the Russian invasion of Ukraine.
Well, I was going to ask you about that later, but since you started with it, I'll jump right in. I mean, in Afghanistan, of course, legion amounts of U.S. intelligence failures. And yet on Russia-Ukraine, I mean, the United States seemed to have it wired, right? I mean, literally no one believed that the Americans were saying, look, these guys are going to invade. Here's how they're going to do it. This is the intel we're getting. They're trying to convince the Europeans. Is this because of lessons that were learned? What happened that the Americans actually got that so right?
I can only sort of presume why we got it right in Ukraine and wrong in Afghanistan, and perhaps I would say is because there was an ability for us in vis-a-vis Ukraine to have a certain type of objectivity that we couldn't have after 20 years of investment in war. I mean, the war in Afghanistan, just given its duration, in so many ways defined modern U.S. military thinking and our intelligence capabilities. So it's sort of, how do you, can you see the forest through the trees? In Ukraine, we seemed able to do that. In Afghanistan, we were unable because we were just so deeply involved there for so long.
So what I hear you saying is that you believe that the Americans actually did have the intelligence capabilities in principle to get it right in Afghanistan, and just didn't deploy them, didn't filter them, didn't pay attention to them.
Well, I think there's also the mismatch of, what you need to believe, too. We needed to believe that things would hold together in Afghanistan. That was central to our strategy of withdrawal. I mean, if we look at the strategy of withdrawal in Afghanistan, people have sometimes asked me, well, what do you think we could have done differently? And I would say once we had a strategy where we bet everything on this idea that there would be, what Nixon called the decent interval, from our withdrawal to the time of an Afghan collapse, the government collapsing, if that did happen, that, it would be 2 years, a year, 6 months, some type of decent interval. Once we didn't have that decent interval, it was a fait accompli that it would be a debacle. So we needed that decent interval. In order to have that decent interval, we needed the Afghan military to hold together. And I think that, in many respects, our need to have them hold together clouded our judgment as we were looking at the intelligence.
And did that start, that reality and that understanding, as a result of the Trump agreement with the Taliban, or as a result of the Biden withdrawal?
I think both. I think it's this continual sort of erosion of credibility with the Afghan government. So the Trump agreement with the Taliban certainly undercuts the Afghan government and their legitimacy. I mean, it's not the only thing, but it's a significant variable. They were not a party to those negotiations. And then we get to the Biden withdrawal, and we have a date certain that's set, so we're telegraphing our withdrawal. We are, unlike the Soviets before us, we're engaging in what's called a fighting withdrawal. And so much as, we're still in contact and we're trying to get all of our troops out, and we're getting them out of a landlocked country. So unlike, for instance, in the Iraq War, or unlike when the Soviets left Afghanistan and they back then shared a border with the Afghans, we have to get everybody out via air. And that's incredibly difficult to do. And, we saw the results last summer.